Barrister Richard Gordon QC and by the Conservative MP Robert Halfon. Just as a matter of principle, Mr. Halfon, if an MP does tell a lie, I mean, who should be responsible for disciplining him or getting rid of him or getting rid of her from the House of Commons?
Well, I certainly don't think it should be done by unelected judges, and I greatly worry about this judgment where judges have removed this MP from the House of Commons.
So even though he's a political opponent, it's the principle of who should be in charge?
It should be done by the voters. There should be a system of voter recall where if voters are unhappy with the behaviour of the MP, they should have the right to dismiss him or call a by-election.
But that doesn't happen at the moment. So, I mean, in this case, for example, should it be up to Parliament to
well, in this case, it should be up to Parliament, but I know that the government are going to change the law and have promised to bring in a system of voter recall so that in cases such as this, voters would have the right to remove their MP.
Mr. Gordon, do you see the point here that, we live in a very sophisticated, rather robust democracy. Voters aren't stupid. It should either be up to them or up to parliamentary colleagues rather than the courts in a case like this.
Well, of course I see the point that's being made, but I don't agree with it for this reason. The Representation of the People Act, which was passed in effect over 110 years ago, is designed to promote freedom of expression. And in a very specialised sense, it's freedom of expression of the electorate. If the electorate are told a pack of lies, they can't make an informed decision as to who should represent them. The idea that so-called unelected judges are making or are ousting politicians is not true. The electorate are not going to be able to carry out the sophisticated unravelling of the alleged and ultimately found lies that the electoral court was able to do over a period of several days.
So it's enshrined in law for more than a century?
Well, 110 years ago, women didn't even have the right to vote, so I don't accept that argument. Times have changed. We should have our right to democratically recall our MP if that MP is judged to have done wrongdoing, and it shouldn't be unelected judges in Parliament.
Do you, Mr. Gordon, doesn't this Woollis case in a sense criminalise political differences? Because if we went round all sorts of things where people quote lie, or at least we could have an argument about whether they do lie, that's not really a matter for the courts, is it? That should be a matter for the voters in the end to throw people out, and they do come to a decision eventually about whether their politicians are lying to them.
I think it's very important to realise, if one reads this judgment, that the court applied a criminal standard of proof and treated the case as if it were in effect a criminal charge because of the very serious penal sanctions that were attached to it. And so there's no question of just routine political hyperbole. These were, as the court found at least, deliberate lies, deliberate deception of the electorate. And I would just like to make this one important point. When people go on about unelected judges, judges are not elected, it is true, but they only make decisions when alleged abuses of power are raised. And so the judges only came into the picture in this case because it was indeed alleged by Mr. Watkins that there had been deliberate hoodwinking of the electorate.
Do you think, Mr. Halfon, do you think that Phil Woollis, for example, should be allowed to run again? The voters can make up their mind. They've heard what the judges say. Do you think it would be fair to him, at least, to be allowed him to run?
Well, I think it should be up to the voters to decide. If the voters feel that he's done wrongdoing, then they would have the right to recall him. The judge, I have no problem with the judge ruling against Mr. Woollis and saying he's committed defamation and of character, possibly fining and so on and so forth. But the person, he is the actual elected MP for his constituency, so therefore it should be up to voters to have the right to remove him.
Mr. Gordon, can you tell me in legal terms, where can Mr. Woollis go now? He can appeal this? Could that take a very long time? We had a case in the United States in Minnesota where the senatorial election a couple of years ago went on for ages because the two candidates couldn't agree who had won. So could we have that kind of situation happening here?
Well, there's going to be, as I understand it, what's called a judicial review on Tuesday, which is listed for 1.5 days. It's been listed extremely quickly. I suspect a decision will be made extremely quickly. There is theoretically the possibility of a further appeal to the Court of Appeal, but a case like this would be fast-tracked.
Do you think, what are your worries about this in terms of MPs, quote, lying or not lying, not telling the truth to the voters? Because we could go through everybody's election leaflets. We go through with respect to your own leaflets and say, is that really true?
Yes, well, I accept in some ways this judgment has had some good effect in that people think twice before they put things on their leaflets. And as a Conservative, I would argue that Labour said certain things in the election campaign that weren't true about the winter fuel allowance and closing down shore start centres.
Do you think all political parties, I mean, we've heard the gentleman up in Oldham saying, well, the Lib Dems, they didn't tell us what they were going to do about tuition fees and so on. We could go round in circles about those kind of matters,
yes, but
couldn't we?
What I'm saying is that voter recall should be not about policy, but it should be about wrongdoing. So if an MP is judged to have committed wrongdoing, as he was in this case, the voters would then have the right to remove that MP if enough of them wanted to do so.
Okay, thank you both very much.